What can give someone the ultimate satisfaction in life?
The things you achieve.
The greatest things I could achieve.
For me, happiness.
It's a healthy shift, but again, if happiness is all you're seeking, there's going to be things that comes into your life that destroy the happiness that you have no control over.
Value interpersonal relationships.
Satisfying relationships.
100%.
I don't think you can ever be happy by making somebody else unhappy, though.
I think to put myself in a position where I can wake up every day and have a smile on my face.
Yeah, for sure.
Success, it's probably something we all think about, right, Pastor?
Yeah, I think success is something we all maybe struggle with at times and pursue at other times. For some people, it propels us to work harder to try and succeed, and for other people, maybe they take shortcuts. But they're trying to get to success. Some people just get paralyzed by fear of thinking that they won't be successful, and it keeps them from even doing anything. So different approaches, but we all kind of think about what is success. Either strive for it or get stuck.
Now, the word itself can communicate different things for different people, and it can be very subjective. So, how would you define success? And
yeah, I guess what's the standard in the definition of success? I think we're going to get there, but as far as people are concerned, there's all kinds of different ideas about what success is. Mm-hmm. Probably as many different ideas about what success is as there are people. And in some of the video clips that you had right at the beginning of this video kind of give some different ideas on what success is. I know when I was young, my elders or the people in the next generation above me, there was a lot of pushing education. When you want to attain your education, get your degrees, that's success. Achievement, the things you achieve demonstrate your success. The property you own, the bank accounts you have, the financial security that you might possess, maybe power, you gain a position, and that indicates your success. And the trouble is all those things eventually prove empty. And sometimes people strive so much for one of those things that they miss some very important parts of their life. In the video clips, some of the people that you were able to ask the question to, what is success to you? For some of them, it kind of shifted away from those traditional elements of our society that says you're successful. And some of the younger people today, in my generation and below, are saying, well, happiness is success. Mm-hmm. I want to enjoy my life. And if I can enjoy my life, I enjoy my career, I love what I'm doing, I'm successful regardless of the outcome. Mm-hmm. And that's a healthy shift. But again, if happiness is all you're seeking, there's going to be things that comes into your life that destroy the happiness that you have no control over. Mm-hmm. And so that may prove empty as well. But some people pursue an enjoyable career, satisfying relationships. They want to have healthy family, a healthy relationship with a spouse or a significant other. They want to have time with their family. Those things to them are success. Maybe they saw that was missing in the generation before them, and they're trying to correct that. There's been a swing in the pendulum. But if those are all the things you're looking for, it may prove empty. I think we either let society define what success is, or sometimes we let how other people look at us define what success is. Sometimes we let our personal feelings, our personal beliefs define what success is. How we see ourselves, how we feel about ourselves. Those are the type of things that sometimes we allow to define what success is. So what becomes the standard? How do we determine what is success?
Yeah, exactly. So now with so many different ideas, how do we really know what success is?
Yeah, so many different ideas. And I think the problem comes down to that little word we. If we are determining what success is, humanity determining it, or your culture or your peer group is determining success, individuals are determining what success is, it's all we-centered or me-centered. And the center of all that, the center of that definition is me, what I think, what culture thinks, what people think, what humanity thinks. That becomes the central question. But as we've been looking in our series, we've been talking about sovereignty. We've been talking about God and his control over everything, going all the way back to creation. And if God is the creator, then what he thinks is most important should define what success is. Because ultimately, if God is the one in control, each one of us will one day stand before him and answer for our lives. Hebrews 9:27, right from the Bible, it says, it's once appointed to man to die and then the judgment. And we're all going to stand before God one day. We're all going to have him as the ultimate judge. Why? Because he's the ultimate creator. Because he's sovereign. Because he's over all of us. So if he's the one that's going to determine what the standard is, he's the one that's going to do the judging, then success should be and is what matters most to God. And that's where if it's all about what matters to me, I think we miss the mark as what is successful, since God is the one that's ultimately going to determine whether we're successful or not.
So ultimately, if we're going to be successful, what matters the most is what God thinks. It's not on our proper definition of success, but the way God sees it, correct?
Right, yeah, I think you're right on there, Jackson. Regardless of how much we think of ourselves or how much other people think of ourselves, that's how kind of what determines success. And it's usually based on, well, I think I'm a little better than the next person, so I'm a little more successful. And what does culture think of? Well, I have a little more status in my culture, or I'm a little better class, or I'm a little better position, so that makes me successful. And regardless of how much we think of ourselves or other people think of us, what matters the most is, what does God think of us? So what's successful in God's eyes, and have we pursued that? Solomon, I think, is a great example. And I love, one of my favorite books of the Bible, and that's maybe an odd book to have as one of your favorite books, is the book of Ecclesiastes. And I love it because it just gets down to brass tacks. It looks at what the things of this world, what humanity pursues and thinks is important. And Solomon dives into all of it, looks at it directly, says, I've experienced it, I've pursued it, I've done it, and it was empty. It was vain, he says often in our English translations. The idea is empty. It proves to be meaningless. And Solomon looks at wealth, and people pursue that for success. And Solomon looks at pleasure, the idea of happiness, the things that I do that I enjoy, and doing that for success. Relationships.
Education too.
Yeah, education, what I know, the knowledge, the wisdom, the things that I gain. He looks at music, passions, the passions people have, the properties and the things that they achieve, the things that they produce. He looks at all of that, and in the end, he determines all of that is in and of itself meaningless. If that's all we're doing to gain meaning in our life, or gain purpose in our life, or gain as the success of our life, it all falls short. And I love it. He comes to the end of his book in chapter 12, Ecclesiastes 12, and he sums it all up and says, okay, throw away the rest. I mean, it's all good because I've determined and discussed and lined out how these things are meaningless. But at the very end of the matter, and he says this, now that all has been heard, here is the conclusion. Fear God, keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or it is evil. And Solomon's saying, ultimately, God's the creator, God's the judge. What he sees that matters most is what matters most. So fear God. Don't waste your time pursuing in the end of themselves all of these things. And Solomon, throughout the book of Ecclesiastes and Proverbs, he'll say, working hard is good. He'll say, providing for your family, growing, learning, pursuing things that you enjoy, all those things are good. But if that's where your focus is and you miss God in it, and God isn't the center of it, and God isn't where your focus is,
Now,
you won't be successful.
do our motivations have something to do with it? Like
Definitely.
what we're pursuing, it can be education and it can be money and position. Does the attitude or the motivation have something? Does it have something?
Oh,
to
definitely, definitely. I think all throughout God's word, this is where we sometimes get it messed up in the church and our individual lives. God is so concerned about the heart, and we as humanity always make it about what we do, because that's what we can see. And so success in this world and in our culture, what is it? It's about what we tangibly can see. And for God, it's not about that. It's about the heart. It's about the motivation. It's why we do what we do, not so much what you do. Now, what we do matters. Why we do it matters more. And so the motivation is so important. It's the foundation. I believe true success, we want to define it, is living under God's authority and following his lead. And that's not ultimately about a set of things that I can say, if I do this, this, and this, I'll be successful. It's all about my heart for God and how I'm going to yield myself to him and be willing to serve him throughout my life. For the world, success is all about living for ourselves, for our power, maybe our pleasure, our status, our possession, all of those type of things, our happiness. But true success is living under God's authority and for God's authority and following him. True success says, I'm going to set myself aside and I'm going to live for God's principles. So for God, it's all about the intangibles, about the motivation and then what we do with that motivation. And so loving God, I mean, we'll boil it right down to simplicity, loving God and loving people. And out of that comes God's heart. We live God's character. We live God's principles. And as we do that, that's success. That's living for God.
Yeah, because as you mentioned earlier, success is not about a list of things that we have to achieve, because
Right.
Being realistic, we all not going to have all the opportunity to achieve every single thing in life, because only a few have certain opportunities to be able to attain them. But from God's perspective, it's about living out whatever the opportunity you have or the resource you have. You still have the right motivation and doing it.
Right. For God, it's not the outcome as much as it is how we pursue the journey and how we live for him in the process. The process is so important, and yet we as humans, we kind of focus on the outcome. What do I get, or what do I attain, what do I achieve? We're all about the outcome. What we do, God is all about the process, how we live.
Now, as you mentioned, working hard and earning an income and saving money, having a home, all those things, they are not inherently wrong, right?
Yeah, no, they're not. They're not wrong at all. That's a part of our life, is to pursue all of those things. We have responsibilities. We've got families that we need to take care of. We have careers that we need to pursue. We may serve in church, but each one of those things shouldn't be an end in of itself, and that's where we kind of get off. Proverbs, it talks about us working hard. Proverbs says it's wise to work hard and save and to provide for your family. It says in Proverbs it's wise to prepare ahead and leave an inheritance. It talks about wisdom, healthy relationships, wise husband-wife relationships, and enjoying creation, enjoying the things that God created. All of those things are important. They're all things we need to pursue. I think the warning in all of that is, don't make the pursuit of any of those things more important, nor our desire to accomplish more important than God. And so God should be at the center of every pursuit that we have. And he should, and our desire to live for him in anything that we do, that's the most important. God gave a warning to Israel at one point. He said in Deuteronomy 8:18, he says, remember the Lord your God. So in everything that you do, remember God is at the center, or He should be at the center of it. And the problem is we tend to center in on, say I want to pursue I want to get my education. I have 3 master's degrees. I didn't do that just to get a degree. That wasn't the point at all. I grew to love the Word of God. I grew to love studying God's Word, but so that I could explain it, so that I could teach it, so I could lead God's people, so that I wouldn't be shortcutted and only could lead so far and then had to say, sorry, that's all I know. I mean, I need to continue to learn, to continue to grow so I can continue to lead. It's all about how can I help other people. The problem is sometimes we can get so focused in on, say, education for one instance. I want to get that degree, and then I want to get a doctorate, and then I want to get my postdoctorate, and I want to achieve, and the education becomes the end in of itself. That's just one mode of growth. When it becomes the end in and of itself, then we've made it the God. And that's where the problem comes in.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I really admire your desire always to learn.
Right. How are you going to use that for God's purposes? In that warning that God gives Israel, He says, remember the Lord your God. He goes on to say, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth. And so confirms His covenant and says, which He swore to your ancestors as it is today. The whole idea of that verse is, remember God, because He's the one that gives you the ability. And sometimes we get so focused in on the achievement that we forget about the one who made it possible. Some people can create incredible wealth. If they do that for the end in and of itself of becoming wealthy and having the achievement and then having the status of that and the class of that, and it's all for themselves, that's not success. I mean, it may look like success to the world around them. Wow, look what they achieved. But when they stand before God, it won't be success. It should never be about us. It should be about, God has given me this ability, or He's given me this resources. He's given me this, and I can steward it, putting Him at the center and use it for His purposes, guided by His heart, guided by His character, living out His principles, to love Him deeper, pursuing God, and then to share that love with other people.
And we all have to give an account for whatever God has put in our hand.
The Bible gives us the perspective that God wants us to do our best. He wants us to be productive. There's many passages that talk about working well and not being lazy, and yet acknowledging Him in the middle of it, seeking Him, seeking to live a life of thanksgiving. And even passages that say, you could have the best preparation, you could have the most money, you could have the most resources, you could have everything all figured out, but if God's not at the center, without God at the center, it doesn't matter how much work you do, how much effort you have, how much resources you have, the victory isn't going to work out the way you want it to. And it talks about that in the example of a king. Without God at the center, no grand army is going to save the king. Proverbs 21:31 has the same type of example. It says the horse might be ready, so you might have all the preparations for war, you may have everything all set up and ready to go, but the victory rests with the Lord. And ultimately, there's often a lot of things out of our hand, a lot of things out of our control. Sometimes it's sometimes it's people. Sometimes it's the other things that are going on around us. Sometimes the environment. Sometimes the opportunities that we live in an unjust world. God didn't create it that way. He created it perfect, but yet we destroyed it, and that affects the opportunities we may have. And yet God can take all of that and use it and turn our life into success. But remember, that's not the world's success. What is God trying to work toward? Romans 8:28, we touched on that a couple weeks ago. God is working toward our redemption. God is working toward our sanctification. He wants us ultimately to look more and more like Him. That's success. We tend to get off on the success that everybody else defines, and we miss God's perspective.
Now, looking at the examples in teaching in the Bible, how does God's perspective on success differ from our natural viewpoint?
Sure, yeah. Humanly, I think we naturally defer to accomplishment and what we do. So either what we're enjoying or what we're accomplishing and what we're doing, and that's all tangible things that we see or experience right in our life right now. The Bible gives a different perspective for God. And I think Jesus simplifies that and kind of ties it up. Jesus does a lot of things about wealth, about work, about success throughout the Gospels. And in Matthew 6:19-21 brings a little bit of that up. And Jesus says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moss and vermin destroy." What do we do as humans? What does success look like to us? Well, storing up things here on earth. Yeah, that's what it looks like to us. And so Jesus says, well, that's where thieves are going to break in and steal. That's where it's going to decay and fall apart and all that. And Jesus says, instead, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moss and vermin don't destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, that's where your heart's going to be. That's where success is. Later in the passage, Jesus says you can't serve two masters. And I think this is like convicting to all of us, because sometimes we think we can walk this fence and say, I'm going to pursue the things that the world desires, and at the same time I want to say I love God. And Jesus says it doesn't work that way. You can't serve two masters. Either you're going to hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and you'll despise the other, and you can't serve God and, he says in the passage, money. What is so often the definition of success in our world is money. Money gets power, money gets position, money gets place in this world. Money gives you the freedom to pursue the things you want to pursue. Money is what people have and want more of. And Jesus says, no, that can't be your focus. God might give you money, but if the money itself becomes the focus, then success is not what you'll have. Jesus is challenging our priorities. He's saying you need to do what will last for eternity. Save up, store up, not in your bank account. Save up and store up what's going to last for eternity, what matters when you stand before God. I often think about in my mind the phrase that Paul gave. He sought to hear, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." Jesus gives that in a parable. Paul kind of draws on that later in his ministry. The idea of walking into God's presence and knowing that you've done well. You pursue what God wanted you to pursue. And it's not possible if our focus is on our wealth, our possessions, our property, on our happiness, on our accomplishments, then success won't be the result, because our mind is on what we get and enjoy today versus what lasts forever. It comes down to a decision. Divided, we can't succeed if our mind is divided, if it's walking that fence, if it's trying to get what the world wants and at the same time say we love Jesus. Divided, we fall. We can't walk the fence. We can't pursue success for ourselves and say we have success for God at the same time. We have to choose. Are we all out for ourselves, or are we all in, full out, committed, and all in for God, and pursuing what matters for Him? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, it really comes down to all that. It is very simple. Really success.
Really good. Now,
loving God and loving people.
What does that look like?
Sure. Yeah. It's a process of developing God's heart, living out His character, following His principles, and through all of that, influencing other people. What does that look like from God? It's love. It's justice. It's sacrificial generosity. It's grace and mercy. It's honesty. It's being willing to obey God's commands. Treating other people in the way that God has treated us. And how did He treat us? Forgiveness, sacrifice, giving us acceptance and bringing us into his family and treating us like we are his children. And if we're going to succeed in loving God, we're going to pursue him in his heart and his character, his principles, and then we're going to spread that out to other people. And we're going to love them the same way God loved us. There's very little in this world that we can take with us that matters for eternity, right? Mm-hmm. Store up treasure in heaven for what matters for eternity. Well, we can take our character. We can take the way we live this life. We can take our sacrificial giving with us, how we've used the things that God gave us, either our abilities, our resources, our time, the way we treat people, the opportunities we've been given. We can take that with us if we use it for God's purposes. We can take other people with us. We influence people for God. We take them with us for eternity. Store up treasure in heaven. That's what success looks like. In that process, there's a couple things we can think about. We ought to continually evaluate, and it comes back to motivation, right? Mm-hmm. That's, again, what we talked about earlier. We start asking questions like, when I stand before God, what value is what I'm doing right now? Or what I'm gaining right now? Or what I'm pursuing right now? If I'm standing before God and I'm defending and I'm saying, here, I did this, what value did that have to God? How much does he value the thing that you're pursuing right now? And we should be thinking about that. Mm-hmm. If it's not something that is expressing God's heart or living out his principles or living out his character, or we're pursuing some achievement, and to pursue that achievement, we got to set aside God's character and God's principles, it's not something that's going to be ultimately successful. Think about what value it has for God. Another question, while I'm pursuing this, how am I loving God and how am I loving others in the process? Mm-hmm. God wants to see us follow him in the process. How would God evaluate what I'm pursuing? Ask that. So the things I'm doing, the things I'm trying to achieve, the things that I'm pursuing in my life, how would God evaluate them right now?
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned that, because we've seen some examples of people, they pursuing something and they lose people in the process of it. Like,
sure.
They will be pursuing, it can be academia and it can be career, and they neglect their family or others. So
right.
I think it's very important to keep on loving people and paying attention to people around you and not being too driven toward whatever you're pursuing and consider to be success.
Yeah, what you're pursuing may be a good thing, but you've missed what is best. Mm-hmm. So don't ignore the people on the road. It's the process. How do you live through that? Pursuing that degree. If you're doing that in such a focused and in such a way that you ignore everyone around you, the opportunity to influence people for your faith, the opportunity to spend time with your family, the opportunity to build relationships, well, you've missed all the things that God wanted you to succeed in. You've missed God's success on your way to your success. So how would God evaluate that? How can I put God's characters and his principles into practice while I'm pursuing this? How can I demonstrate God's heart while I'm pursuing this? Some of the questions that we can ask.
Well, Pastor, that's a lot to think about. Perhaps not the way we normally look at success in our world.
Book I brought with me, Radical. My copy is a little worn and torn, but David Platt has written this book, and it's very challenging. It's been challenging to me as well, with the whole concept of living a life full out for Christ. And I think if we pursue that, we will succeed. When we stand before God, if we've lived our life all in for him, we're going to see success. And often I hear the words, well, don't we need to be balanced in all things? And I agree with that to a point. But balanced in everything in our life except faith. Except our faith. And that's the idea of this book. we shouldn't live a balanced life in many ways. We're a Christian, we're all in 100%, maybe 120% for God. And that's going to be radical to the people around us. Success isn't an idea of let me just balance my life and I'll have a certain amount at work and I'll have a certain amount with my family and a certain amount for God, and it just kind of all balances and the scales get weighed. No, it's 100% all in for God. In every area of my life, God is at the center. And that will look radical to this world. In a couple chapters, just I'm not going to go through the whole index, but just to whet your concept, the first chapter is someone worth losing everything for. We want to live a life of success. Jesus gave up everything for us. Are we willing to give our life for Him? Give our life in the way we pursue knowing Him? Give our life in the way we pursue sharing that love with other people? Are we willing to give up this world for Christ? That's radical, because this world says, no, you get for success, you attain for success, you pursue for success, and David Platt's going to say, no, you succeed when you're willing to lose it all. Another chapter, and it's later on in the book, it says, there's no plan B. And I think if we want to live a life successful for God, we live it in a way that says, I don't have a plan B. I'm all in, 100%, 110% for God. No matter what He asks me to do, that's what I'm going to pursue. And we can do that living out His character, living out His heart, just what was God's heart for us, and then living that for other people. But being all in, no plan B, no turning around, no sidetracks. Not often in success you say, well, I can't put all my eggs in one basket. And yet in faith you say, yeah, everything's in one basket. There is no second option. It's all on Christ.
Great. Now, Pastor, would you agree if I tell you that the notion of a biblical success is not a popular thing in our culture? Because
it is not.
Our culture tells us about trying to step over somebody else's heads in order to get where we want to go.
I think one of the things I want to always remember is, at the end of the day, I don't stand before this culture when I end my life, but I will stand before God.
Amen.
And